What's up, everybody? My name's Cody Retlick. I'm your host of the Legacy Liftoff podcast by Dronadair. We are here with our next episode, Troy from Quad Standard Labs. Troy, thanks for being here today, man.
Yeah, man. Hey, Cody, thank you for having me and asking me to be here. It's always something fun to do is have conversation. It's something I wish we did more often.
Yeah, man,
Me
it
and
is.
you, I mean people.
In general, yeah, no, it's just
Yeah,
fun, right? I mean, I've
yeah.
I've been enjoying it. I think you're our 19th episode so far, and
Ah,
yeah, we're literally booked out until
cool.
like the end of August now, which is just awesome because it's just been a blast so far. But as always, in the beginning of any podcast, I always love to just hear your origin story of kind of like where you came from. How did you get into drones? I know just from, a little bit of discussion before and just, looking at LinkedIn that you were actually started in the culinary industry, right? And restaurants and whatnot. So I would love to just kind of hear your origin story of like, hey, what were you doing beforehand and like how did this all become? Like how did you get into the drones?
Yeah, so thanks for asking. Yeah, there's lots of content out there, different ways of figuring out my story, so to speak. Not to say that I can't tell it, because again, I tell it quite often. I think it's one that's like a lot of folks, I think, that are kind of and as much as I'm sure folks out there think that I love to be like arrogant and kind of self-serving and full of myself, I really don't. So I hate saying this, but kind of being one of the OGs, so to speak, of that generation of FPV. And, there were people before us, and I'm not trying to say I was like at the culmination of the start of FPV and Trappy and everybody building headsets. Like, no, wasn't there. But I was into like ground RC as a kid, and then I got back into it when I was in the restaurant industry. I've been a little bit of everything. I've done telemarketing, I've done sales. I've always been someone who enjoyed, I guess, like having something and selling it to someone, or preparing it for someone, serving it to someone, having them appreciate, enjoy it, and like what that kind of like that reciprocation back of like the respect of like, hey, like that was a good deal, or that was great food, or whatever it is, right? And so, like I said, I've done lots of different things. I was always somewhat, pretty much successful at what I did and made my way either up the food chain or, into different positions and leadership and stuff. But I fell into becoming having a career as a chef, so to speak, really because my wife. I moved to Austin, Texas when I was 21 years old, and we had been dating shortly before that. She was here in Austin. I was in Houston, or West Houston, Katy. I moved up here, and we had been together about 4 or 5 years. And kind of, she just was like, "Hey, like I'm progressing into a career path. What are you gonna do full time all the time, and like kind of make your career out of, or kind of get on with it, get out of here?" And so at that point, I just kind of asked myself, like, what do I enjoy doing? And I enjoyed cooking, and I enjoyed the restaurant industry that I had been, which was a server and a front of house kind of management at that point. But I wanted to like get into the kitchen side, and like a lot of folks would tell you just go get a job and work your way up, and that's definitely a path for lots of different industries. Honestly, like knowing how to find the right place to begin with, and this is full circle back, knowing now would have been so hard to figure out. And there's so many bad stories out there that like I'm glad I chose to go to culinary school. And I chose to go to culinary school because it was a fast tracked way into learning the backside of the business, and having a really big, like, broad 30,000 foot view, so to speak, of like the entire industry, so I could decide like what I wanted to do. And this was 2005, 2006 that I went to school. I had an accident back then, a motorcycle wreck, but long story short, I was laid up for 6 months. It kind of prolonged my experience. But once I graduated and was in the industry, I kind of worked my way up. Like I had before, like, through a particular path where like I wanted to experience a little bit of all types of food. So started at a golf course, went to a place that was pretty much like the number one service restaurant in the country at the time in terms of like volume and dollars per day on like a weekend. We were doing, I mean, it's just a stupid amount. Like it's like $250,000 a night in sales, and that's just ridiculous, especially when it's like Tex-Mex food that's under $20 for the most part. And so I did that, and then I started working for small companies, helping open restaurants, started finding my way into more fine dining stuff, which I never really wanted to do. And then I kind of got back into just working for an entrepreneur that was a local chef that had went to Houston and started a company that a lot of folks know as Carrabba's. Carrabba's was then sold, and Damien, one of the Mandola brothers, who was started Carrabba's with his nephew, moved up to Austin so he could start another restaurant because he had a no-compete clause at the time. So he started Mandola's up here, and he was well known at the time, had three stores, was opening a fourth, and I responded to an ad in a job that didn't say where it was, but basically it led me to being hired at Mandola's as a manager. I was actually at the time a front of house like assistant, but I had a culinary degree, and so I did really well. I was doing my job, and like 6 months into my job, I got brought in by the owner and my boss, and they said, don't tell anybody, but we're firing the entire management team aside from you and one other person that we're promoting into management from the floor. Don't tell nobody, but do you want the kitchen manager job? And I was like, of course, like, yeah, like, let's do this.
Yeah,
so I basically started running the backside of the restaurant from there, and worked my way up there for 5 years. And when I was at Mandola's was when I started like trying to find something to do in my free time. And so, my days off were during days that my wife was at work. Once my son came along, like he was, at school and daycare. So it's like I'm home alone Tuesdays and Thursdays or Tuesdays and Mondays. And I started playing with ground RC stuff again. And then once I got kind of bored with it a little bit, people had been telling me about like flying and like flying remote helicopters and planes, and then drones had just started hitting the scene in like 2013. And that's when I was like, fine, on one of my, like, I took a couple of days off, and the true origin story is I ordered a Phantom FC40. It was, or not FC40, I'm sorry, a Phantom 2 Plus. That's what it was. I ended up getting it from Amazon, and it was like an open box, clearly used for a long period of time. You could tell by the wear and tear on it and like the discoloration. And it really pissed me off because I took like 4 days off because I was going to learn how to fly this thing and get into drones. And I ended up like sending it back. Amazon took it back, but I wasted my week off. And I ordered a Flame Wheel F450 kit at that point just to build my own drone. So the first drone I built, I built it. I took it outside in the middle of the night and no LEDs, and I started to take off and fly it, and it was flying. I'm like, wow, this is awesome. And then I'm like, hey, let me play with it a little more. And like next thing I know, what was at the time considered a flyaway, but a user flyaway, I guess, is it was in ATTI mode, and the wind was pushing it, and I couldn't see it. It was dark, and now it started misting rain, and basically I watch it like drift into the night and then bang off a roof, and I'm like, oh my gosh. So like I run out the back door and I go grab my car and I drive around the neighborhood frantically looking, and I'm like, I don't know where it is. But I had turned the radio off because like one of the few things I did do is I programmed the return to home properly in the failsafe. And so I turned the radio off and I went driving around. I couldn't find it. And I'm finally on my way back, and I'm like, classic drone guy. I'm like, okay, I just lost how much money? Like, how am I going to get another drone? Like, I've got a $500 radio. Like, I've got battery chargers. Like, I've got to fit, And, like, I turned the corner to my house, and there it is flashing on the side of the curb. It literally landed itself 5 feet from where I took off. And so that was my true origin story, was I was just playing with stuff on the side. But to further that into how do we get to here now that we're into drones. So yeah, I continue to be a chef and a restaurant manager for another couple of years. I got into FPV about 3 or 4 months later, where I'd seen the classic like Sharpoo videos and the flying through the holes in the wall. Then the pod racing guys in somewhere in Europe that were going like flying through the forests, and they were racing each other with like LEDs on, and like that totally sparked a ton of us. And so I quickly like kind of gravitated towards FPV for fun. And at that point, that multi GP picked up. We had a chapter here. I started going there, and then I started running that chapter. I was doing YouTube, so I was making a ton of YouTube like content on my Chef PV page, and I was literally like every day I was making content, like multiple videos a day. I was posting anything and everything I flew, what I was buying, what I was using, how I was building. I didn't know any of this stuff really. I was just doing it. And at that point, I kind of, became an expert because of how much gear I had gone through and how much I had progressed into being able to not just fly, but build and understand and, take my other business skills, which were, restaurant skills, which if you ever run a restaurant, you basically are everything. I mean, it's maintenance, it's, financials, it's people skills, it's employee skills, it's hiring, it's firing, it's all of those things, ordering food, like maintaining like constant freshness and a quality standard, like all these things were ingrained into me. And so I kind of just kept making YouTube content with the idea that like maybe somebody would want to employ me sometime, which was the right thing at the time. And again, at the time, there's very few and far between. There's no schools and people teaching classes about drones yet. It's just there's not even regulation. I mean, Part 333 came out like I don't know what 2015, I think. So I was already 2 or 3 years in. And everybody thought that that was like the end of the drone industry and nobody would ever be able to work using drones again. But really it was a precursor to like what we see now with remote ID, and like the exact same way that it was utilized to partially stunt but more so kind of contain and like slow down growth to be able to understand it, to then be able to apply better standards to. At any rate, we get into deeper thought.
Yeah, I mean,
All that was going on, right? And so late 2015, me just being me, doing my thing, hoping that I might finally get a job or something. I had been one of the first 30 with a 3DR solo, and in the United States, because I pre-ordered it and I happened to be in the lottery of the first 30 that they shipped. They shipped 30 units to the United States with the intention of seeing how it worked out so they could do an update before blasting the full batches out. And I ended up crashing it, or it crashed itself into a church while doing an orbit function that it was supposed to be able to do. I posted about it. I made a video, and next thing I know, like I'm getting messages from people from 3DR. And I had been following them, and I knew the folks, but like Philip Rouse, who, if anybody knows, is the guy that essentially him and Tridge and a couple other guys all developed the original ArduPilot Pixhawk flight controller, and then the Cube at the time, which was what was in 3DR Solo. I mean, so he now runs Profi CNC and Hex that makes Cube. He hit me up and was like, "Hey, do you have time for a call?" And I'm like, "Okay." And he's in Australia, and he calls me. He's like, "Hey, like, what happened?" And I explained it to him. And he's like, "Man, I need you to take that drone to our campus in Austin, where I happen to be. Drop it off. They'll give you a brand new one. You can have a new one. We'll make sure it gets updated with the new stuff. But I need that one sent out so we can take a look at it and see what happened." So that unit was essentially used as like a firmware update that ended up being, figuring out some issues with the compass and the GPS. And so that, though, like kind of like 3DR solo stuff that I was doing, because I was one of the first 30, it really just pushed my content on my channel up. I mean, I went from I think like a couple hundred subscribers to 500 almost overnight, to from 500 to 2,000. And it was just like crazy, like how quickly it grew. And so I just continued to do what I was doing, just making content. It was still not gaining much traction, but the 3DR stuff was carrying me. And then I had a company that wanted me to review their flight controller and it was called GEJIYI, and they were basically knocking off like all the DJI NASA stuff. And they sent me this, and they were like, "Can you test it?" And I'm like, "Sure, I'll rebuild my flame wheel with it. Like, we'll put this gear in it, and we'll see how it does." Well, they sent it to me, and it didn't work because it wasn't compatible with my ESCs, which they knew I had, and I was like, "This is like again like." Just shows that like I'm still the same person, and like what I am at the core kind of leads me to where I am. I basically am like, dude, this is stupid. Why did y'all send me this? I'm really upset. I'm disappointed. I tore my whole gear down the day before it arrived, and now I can't even use it. And I got to rebuild my drone, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, this sucks. So I kind of was in their groups and in public space where they were still tagging. And about 3 months later, they posted something about their flight controller and they were going to be at CES. And I responded about how disappointed I was that they sent me gear to test that never, worked out. It just sucked, blah, blah, blah. And they emailed me and asked if I wanted to go to CES and work with them. And I was like, well, first they offered me a sales job. And I said, no, I got a day job. I don't need a commission sales job. And they're like, well,
after you don't even want it.
Yeah, that was the craziest part. I'm like, this makes no sense, right?
How is that a transition? That doesn't make
So I'm like, look, I have a job. I work 60 hours a week. I don't need another job unless it's going to pay me more than I do. And they were like, well, how about you come to CES and work for us there for a few days and we can talk about it. I was like, I mean, okay, but here's what it costs per day for me to go somewhere. You got to pay for all the travel and all the stuff plus a per diem. Like, if you'll send me the money to buy the tickets, sure, like I'll do that. And they did. Like, I thought it was like, again, even now knowing all of the different people, I mean, I can't believe it was kind of real. Like, it was just weird that it really was. So I show up at CES January 2016. They've got like business cards with my name on it, like says like salesperson. I'm just like, what the heck? Like, I don't understand. Like, I don't work for y'all, But the crazy thing is I spent a week at CES 2016 with some of what are now like the most foundational people in the UAS market, and not just FPV, like really the drone space. And the best example is our booth was right across from Thunder Tiger, and Thunder Tiger RC at the time owned RMUS. And so RMUS was Rocky Mountain UAS, and John McBride was put in charge of running that because he was working for Thunder Tiger when he told them like, we need to get into this market. And so he was running that side. Fast forward a year later, he buys RMUS from Thunder Tiger so he can operate it for himself. And now John McBride is head of Autel US. And he's worked for DJI. He's done all kinds of things in between. He's probably sold more commercial drones than anyone else, right? And I think he's also with Unmanned Tech now. He's like on their board of directors.
I think he's actually with the droning company now.
The droning company, that's what it is. Yeah, not Unmanned Tech. Sorry.
Yep. Yeah, I was just.
But I spent a week with that guy. I got to know him, became a pretty good friend of mine, like over the years, like going to all the trade shows after that. Like we had this like clique of people that we all knew each other. And we were like kind of founding members of a lot of different areas of the FPV market. And so like that was the eye-opening experience. But while I was there, day 4, I'm, slinging cell phone gimbals. So 2016, cell phone gimbals were the hot thing. And GE had a couple of them, and basically my spiel, like we had other stuff there, don't get me wrong, but like the thing that got people to stop in a sea of drones was like holding your phone and being like, hey, check it out, like blah blah, yeah, right. And I've got this mic on and it's blaring, and I'm like, I've done this spiel 100 times in the last hour. Reaching the end of the day on like Wednesday or Thursday, I think it was Thursday, and this guy starts walking towards me, and I don't know why I was like, man, okay, one more time, Troy. And I'm like, and he stops and he's like, I recognize you. And I was like, okay. And he's like, I have more footage of Necker Island than 3DR does. And I'm like, what? I'm like, what is Necker Island? I have no idea. And I'm like, okay, dude, cool. And he's like, no, like you're the 3DR guy, right? And I'm like, yeah, like I have a YouTube, yes. And I've been being recognized for it. And anyways, and then he busts out his cell phone and he shows me this video. And the video is like a DJI Phantom pulling back. And it's first at just him in a t-shirt. And I see more people in a t-shirts, all the same t-shirts. And then right next to him is fucking Richard Branson. And I'm like, wait a second, Necker, Necker Island. Now I get it. And the T-shirts everybody, including Richard, were wearing were these 500 below T-shirts. Funny enough, I have
You got one there?
No,
I got it. Oh, man.
So I'm like, okay. And so he starts to tell me he's like a entrepreneur from Nashville. He's got companies, blah, blah, blah. He's made a bunch of money doing this, doing that. He's into drones. He has this new thing he's doing. He's like creating an app that's essentially like the Uber drone support for drones. And again, this is 2016. FPV is in its infancy. I can see the pain points he's trying to solve, and I'm like, okay, like this has some legs in the commercial or the consumer market for sure at that point, but like FPV, no, it was too soon. So at any rate, we talk about it. I took him to a multi-GP race that they had out there in Vegas, XDC2, introduced him to a bunch of people. He went and partied. He invited me to go party. I'm like, dude, I can't. I got a job to do 6:30 tomorrow. I'm sorry. I can't believe I'm saying no. I flew out. He flew out. He's like, don't worry, we'll be in touch soon. And I'm like, okay. 4 months later, I'm in my job at the restaurant, and he calls me up and is like, hey, can you come to Nashville? And I'm like, to work or like for a day? And he's like, for a couple of days, like, I got something I want to show you. I'm like, okay, buy me a ticket, pay for me to go there. Sure. Sure enough, email get, here's your flight, here's your itinerary, blah, blah, blah. I'll pick you up at the airport next week. I'm like, okay. So I went there, I walk in, and basically he's got a conference call set up immediately, and like people start talking. He's like, just hang out. And I'm like, okay. And I start looking around, and I start realizing they're talking about this app, and I'm like, what? I started making like notes and blah, blah, blah. By the time I left that trip, he wanted to hire me to help, or to be the product, or what was my title there? Product manager. So the product manager for the
going into this, you didn't know what at all.
I mean, I had no like yeah. I grew up in the computer market. So in the early 90s, when the home PC kind of game exploded, my stepdad worked for Compact Computers, and we lived in Houston. I used to hang out at the factories, used to build my own PCs at 12, computer science, all that stuff. And then my parents got divorced in 15, so like I kind of shunned computers off at that point for a while, which was probably the craziest thing I did in terms of I would have been in that sector for sure. That's where I was headed, but it wasn't me, and I just didn't want to do it anymore. And so I was not a coder. I had no idea about software development, but I understood drones. And the thing was the app had been progressed already to a point that it was starting to work in the way that he wanted it to work, but they needed the data. Like they needed everything populated within the app. So the drones, the topics, the troubleshooting issues, the products that you could use with your drone that makes you an expert in ND filters, like all of those things, because basically you would come in and you would create a profile either as a driver or as a rider, but in this case, a drone expert or someone looking for advice. And the drone experts had to say that these are the drones I use, these are the hardware I use, these are the topics I think I can help people with. And what would happen is when somebody came in that had a question about that drone and one of those topics or that hardware, then it would ping 3 pilots that had those topics. And the first one to answer would get the call. They could text, they could call, they could send video and pictures. And then when they were done, the user that got help could leave a tip. And so that was just the base functionality and the base idea, right? And you can see how you could expand that into many different ways, right? And markets and different things. The problem was the time. We got there. So they hired me. 2 months later, I started working out in Nashville. I left the industry, for the restaurant industry, for good. I haven't been back. And I started working for them. About 4 months in, we had a soft launch at Interdrone scheduled in 2016, and I was ready. We launched it, but anybody that is in that sector of software development would have maybe known this, or at least been privy to it. A lot of decisions had been made up to that point on how to develop the software, and it was developed as a hybrid software, so it means that one app can work on both Apple and Android. And there was a problem with that because around that time there began a bigger split of what that difference was, to where hybrid apps were starting to become more difficult, and services like Twilio plugins that were used for communicating SMS and video ended up not working and being broken. And every time we would fix that, some other part would break And so it just became very evident and clear that it needed to be redeveloped, and it needed to be redeveloped into two separate apps. And at that point, the market and some other things, they decided they didn't want to continue down that road, that they would wait, see where that market went in terms of app development on mobile devices before coming back and regrouping. And so they furloughed me or laid me off or gave me some time to find something, which I did. Oddly enough, I found myself working for a Chinese drone company that I actually had previously criticized openly in public quite a few times on their own pages and about their own products. Literally the day they asked me to go to an interview, it was just happenstance that I woke up, I saw this post, and I made a snide comment about when's it ever going to get released. And they were like, we're actually setting up a shop in an office in Austin, Texas. We're really close, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I'm in Austin. They were like, well, we're hiring. Do you need a job? Literally 3 o'clock that afternoon, I'm like interviewing with the president of the company here in Austin. It just happened to be that way. It was, again, me waking up and just being me, doing my thing, led me to this opportunity. And at this interview, they asked me, what do we do to beat DJI? And this is now 27. No, this is maybe early 2018. Late 17. And so late 2017, I'm like, you don't beat them. You find your own thing. You make your own product that isn't something they're doing. And at this point, the Mavic had just come, or the Spark. The Spark had just come out. So the Mavic 1 and 2, I think, were on the market, but the Spark had just come out. And so, they're like, well, what do we do? And I'm like, you just go make your own thing and do your own thing. And, essentially, I guess they liked what I said because they made me a job offer and they hired me. And so I worked for that company. It was called GDU. They were also known prior as Prodrone, but Prodrone is also a Japanese company that makes these huge, giant UASs with claws and stuff that can perch and do all kinds of crazy stuff. So they got sued back in the day. But they're originally the first folding drone was created by Prodrone back in 2014, 2013, something like that. And now they had this new product. I have one over there. I'm not going to get it, but it was essentially what they thought would beat a Mavic and be kind of in between a Spark and a Mavic. It was the size of a Spark, especially when folded, but it had sliding arms that slid out. And bad design. I told them from day one at the interview, it looked like a bad flight characteristic design, but whatever. Long story short, I worked for those guys for about a year and a half. We never really launched the product. It had to go through multiple revisions, including a lot of stuff I had told them, but I was basically head of customer support, and I did a bunch of testing of all the hardware, the new stuff they were trying to build, gave them reports back. I would also handle translating manuals and documentation and checking translations, actually, is what it was. And so I did that.
Did you have another language that you knew, or did you just?
No. They would send me the translated documents, and I'd be like, "Hey, what do you mean by anti-shooting prop?"
Gotcha.
And they'd be like, "It doesn't come off when you spin it." So I'm like a self-locking propeller. So things like that where it's anti-shooting prop is not the right way to say
that's not. That would probably get you sued again, right?
Yeah. So I know we're going long here, so let me try to shorten this out. So anyway, saw the market passing me by in the terms of I was still doing a lot of FPV stuff. I was still managing races. I was doing Maker Faire events here locally. I was doing lots of things in the FPV space, but except for making money or doing anything relevant job-wise. So I got to a point to where these guys were paying me good money, and I could have sat around for another year probably doing nothing and getting good money. But I continued to want to, again, get into that market and put kind of my stamp on like a part of the market in some way, because I knew there was so much from that seeing computers, and that's actually why I got into drones. Was my history with with computers said this is going to explode, and then it's going to explode again, then it's going to continue, and it's just going to create more verticals that continue to get bigger and bigger and bigger as a whole. So I knew there would be a lot of room somewhere. I just still didn't know where it would fit for me. And so, a local company here nearby Austin, Flynoceros, who was a company I had followed. I knew the owner. We all knew him. We're a cult following and was pretty well known in the community. He called me up one day and said, "Hey, I've got this thing. I've been doing for this guy, and come to find out, the guy was somebody I told to go call him about 3 months earlier when I was on my other drone job and had a meeting with him, and he mentioned he wanted to get into FPV racing drones, and I was like, well, you should call Josh. He's the guy that'll be able to help you. Well, Josh called me up and said, hey, look, I developed 3 drones for these guys. They paid me money to do it, but the money's kind of, they've spent their money. I don't know what to do next. They want to build a bunch of them. And I'm like, build a business model of like what that looks like, right? And again, I've seen this because I've seen recipes and scaled recipes and P&Ls and like, the daily sales and all the different things. I understand how to kind of piece things together and make a picture on paper of the financial side of it. And so, yeah, he's like, well, can you do that? And I'm like, give me a couple days. So 2 days later, I sent him an email with a huge spreadsheet document that detailed out scaled production from 1,000 to 10,000 units of 3 different drones, what it looked like in terms of like building the drones and parts and cost per unit. Bigger picture things like, okay, if we're going to build this many drones at a time, then we need this many parts plus extras for failures, for repairs of customer units that they wanted us to handle support. So I built out this like 3-pronged like business model of how we would product develop and charge for that, how we would build drones and charge for that, and how we would fulfill and support drones that they sold but we fulfilled for them kind of as a ghost company. And so I sent it to him and he's like, okay, I have a meeting with him tomorrow. And next day, calls me up. They're ready to sign up. But like, what do we do? And I'm like, well, we do that. And he's like, well, I guess I got to hire you, right? And I'm like, I mean, so
this was before you even were hired. So like you
yeah,
in your
yeah.
mind.
I mean, again, he's a friend of mine.
Okay.
So I'm sorry. Question?
I was gonna say, but you in your mind, since he was a friend and you were like doing all this stuff already for him, you're kind of putting yourself already in that position of
Yeah,
like, man,
I knew that he would need to hire me, of course.
yeah, for sure. You're pretty much putting yourself out there as like, hey, look what I can do to help you do and build this and come up with that idea. But at the end of the day, here, once you need it, I'll be here to execute and help you.
For the most part, yeah. I mean, and that's the way you got to think about these things, right? It's no different than like, I mean, even if you do have a job doing something and somebody asks you, hey, what would you do to do this? You kind of have to make a decision. Like, am I just going to answer this kind of freely and just give them a quick little idea? Or am I going to say, oh, well, if I was going to do it, I'd hire me and this is what I'm going to do. So essentially, yeah, I mean, it absolutely was the way that I presented it. I knew at that point, and I don't talk bad about people, and I try not to like, get into the details, but I'll say that was probably the first and one of the last times that he asked me for something and trusted in what I delivered enough to not only present it, but then it worked and like it got him something, right? And like from there, the relationship kind of went a little downhill, so to speak. But essentially, I mean, it was great times. Like I wouldn't pass it up. He hired me as the director of operations of Flynoceros, and that was in 2018. So in 2018, like mid 2018, I became director of operations of Flynoceros, and I was working with other companies in the space in the FPV community and Rotor Riot and all these other companies, Helio RC, and we were doing lots of different things, trying to ramp that brand up in different ways. While I also helped establish and start building drones out of a shop that he expanded on his property. And so he was in charge of building the shop, and I was in charge of getting it all set up with the gear and the people and the documentation and like what we needed to make this happen at a scaled scale. And we did it. We produced 50 drones a week with 3 people. Yeah, like we got to the point that we had the final number of the first batch built of the 3 drones. We were having some technical difficulties with some things, and at that point is when I had already started pursuing the professional FPV side of things. And so Andy at the time, Andy Shin from Shin Drones, had the squirt that everybody was starting to use. I'm good friends with Andy going back to earlier, like 2016, when I met him in person for the first time. And I was talking to him and realizing that people were asking him for builds and he was building drones, but he didn't want to build drones. And so finally I'm like, hey, what if we just started building batches of like, squirts for you? Like, and we were the exclusive bind and fly squirt dealer. And he's like, let's do it. So built a model out, sent it to him. We negotiated it. Josh signed off on it, and we started doing it. And so we had just started doing that when this other project started kind of coming to a close, and there were some issues, and we just had some disagreements about how we were going to resolve the issues. He made some choices in terms of kind of pursuing things a certain way, and it just didn't work. And so ultimately, he let me go because I was not happy with the direction things were going, and I was not willing to kind of pursue that when we had all this other stuff that we could have been doing, and I thought was more important, especially as the director of operations of a company and being tasked with pursuing a future path. And so unfortunately it didn't work out, and at the end, and I worked for him for just over a year as well, and we produced the drones we were supposed to produce, and that was a huge piece of like the puzzle to where we are today in terms of I left there in early 2019. It was April, and I didn't know what I was going to do. I needed a job. I had to get a job. This wasn't like the last two times that like one time where I gave notice and had time and worked two jobs and so had extra money, or the time before where when I got laid off, I got of money to sustain myself for a few months, and I did. This was like, man, I got a job, like I gotta start like driving Uber or something, like I don't even know. So I literally started thinking about going back into the restaurant industry. I even put in a few quick like applicants at places that were quickly hiring, just like trying to make the effort of I need a job and I got to figure it out. But I knew I didn't want to go back to it, but I didn't know what else to do. So if I wouldn't have done the next thing, I probably would have went back to the restaurant space. But I decided to start asking people around me and like people in my circle that I trusted, and that people at the time that I knew were successful in their own right in whatever they were doing, as well as most of them were doing something for themselves. And that didn't make sense at the time that like that's what I was doing, but I was. And so I asked, 3 or 4 or 5 people, I don't know, like I'm thinking of starting, something, I don't know. And essentially, all of them said, that's a smart idea. You have lots of things you could do. Just figure out what you want to sell and do it. And so Quad Standard Labs was kind of born within a few days of that, in terms of I started a company and I said, I'm going to build professional FPV drones, whatever that means. And I'm going to pursue other opportunities in the drone space and try to bring together as many different like things that I can to provide access to. That's the culmination of like where QSL started. So in 2019 April, 5 years ago, just over 5 years ago, I started the company, and I just started following all those hard rules, as not all day every day, but as often as possible, and when I could. So taking pictures of things, being consistent, and taking the pictures the same way, and posting things all every day and stuff like that. And every chance I had, I was always just improving upon and trying to do more and trying to figure this out. And so the first year, I went to AUVSI 2 weeks later, and I found a client that ended up hiring me to develop hardware. They were a software developer in the drone space, but they needed their own drone. So I started doing that with a couple of buddies, another company or two that I pulled together to do the design work, because I wasn't designing at the time, and another company to help me out with some of the electronics, because it was an Ardu pilot build. And though I had some background in it, I knew I needed like an expert to help me. So I had an expert that I hired to help me there. And so we got all that done, and we were doing that. And while we were doing that, I was hitting up different schools and clubs and school districts and saying, hey, tell me what your pain points are. Like, I don't have anything to sell you. I just want to know what's going on in this space with you guys. And I had somebody contact me that they were like, we need someone to help us develop like a software package for drones. Like, okay, well, I work with a software company now. So I spun that up into a deal. And so for the first year, these folks were paying me to develop hardware and software for them, while I was also continuing to push a few FPV builds out a month. It wasn't very many. It was just, 1 or 2 a month, maybe 3 on a good month. And a couple of buddies helped out by buying, Cinewhoop packages and stuff. And so like I got to a point to where that was the FPV stuff wasn't paying the bills, but it was getting closer. And then COVID hit. And when COVID hit, the two projects we were working on, software and hardware, like literally within days, were like, hey, we got to get out of this deal. Like, what's it going to cost us to like stop production or stop development? And so that sucked. My daily bread was leaving again. I'm like, oh my gosh. But the wild thing was, COVID is what sparked and was the huge catalyst for what we now know as the professional FPV market. And a lot of that is because there were places to get the info from and companies that were doing it. COVID definitely was a catalyst to like really exponentialize, like push it across the board, right? And what I mean by that is like by time people got sent home and all they were doing were these creatives sitting at home going, hey, I heard about this, I heard about that. They're watching NERC and they're watching Vanover and they're seeing all this stuff. Well, they would Google like professional FPV or, you know, Cinelifter or whatever. And guess who came up? And so our phone just started like ringing and my email started like blasting. And within 6 months of COVID, I was like in a place where I was like overwhelmed and I was working out of my house and I'm like, I got to get a shop. I got to find like something else to like do this because it's just, we can't build center lifters in my, you know, study. And so, yeah, I signed in like in November 2020. Yeah, November, I got the shop here and we've been here going on, you know, 4 years in November.
That's awesome.
And so really that's like my kind of legacy in terms of like, again, I'm not one to try to brag, even though people will think that I do. I do feel like there's a core group of probably like 5 to 6 or 7 factors, and most of those factors were people and or companies that
Yeah.
moved the needle in a direction and continued to push when, quite frankly, a lot of people thought we would fail. At AUVSI, the year I started the company, I was laughed out of booths that people said people will never put a cinema camera on a drone without a gimbal. They were
Where are
like,
they
no,
now?
it's not gonna happen. And I'm like, I can show you clients on set right now. Okay, dude. Like, okay. You know? And so
You do what you want.
I told you a 50-minute story there, and I apologize for taking
No, man, I love it. I was just letting you go because I wanted to, hear it all, and you just kept rocking. So, I mean, I love it. Congrats to you, but I mean, I think there's a lot of valuable lessons there too, and just a lot to unpack, obviously, because you had a lot of transition points. But it's also knowing and just seeing what's in front of you of like, oh shit, okay, that happened, but this is going on, and you're still talking to this person, or you're still tinkering with FPVs on the side. You always kind of knew that next thing, really, I guess, or you saw that direction, or you saw the direction you didn't want to go into, right? And you kind of transitioned into a different way. But I think that's just important for anybody that's listening, or just anybody in general, is like knowing one, what you want to do and what you think is going to be successful for you, and that you enjoy doing and you believe is truly going to be that next thing that can propel you to whatever you're doing for, maybe it's the rest of your life, maybe it's the next year, the next 2 years, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be forever. But it's cool, man, because you just constantly saw what was in front of you. And I think, honestly, I would have to look back, but I think you built me a Shen drone. I don't even know if you know this, but you built me a squirt after Nick Lang actually was a previous guest who was going to air, well, this week. We're recording this week, but yours will next week. It was just a crazy coincidence that when Nick kind of put me in touch with you, and I'm not a huge FPV guy. I'm more of just a hobbyist, kind of flying around. I think COVID did help a lot of people in a lot of different ways too. And, for you to take advantage of that as well, of seeing the influx of people coming in and into, really, I think that's what propelled the industry forward, right? Is that COVID era of people hanging out at home or flying around or tinkering with drones or learning a new skill, and just picking something back up. But, what? Because I mean, I know that I have a lot of questions I want to ask you, but I know we're like 46 in. But if you're still willing to share some more, I would love to just kind of unpack more of QS Labs and kind of like
Yeah.
where we're at, because like you've built a lot now, right? You've built some amazing drones for live broadcasts, and you've done a lot of Cinelifter stuff, and you started in the Cinewhoop, right, type stuff, transitioned a lot. um what would be your favorite build yet today?
Oh, man. So my favorite build is the one I don't have to build. I'm so
Yeah,
I,
right.
I mean, I say that, but like, that is like, man, there's a lot, right? And like I said, like, I think my story is not much different than other folks. I think the thing that, conversations like this bring out is like the thought and the understanding and like the self-awareness, bringing someone to some more self-awareness that, you know, as dumb as it sounds, like anybody can really do pretty much anything within reason. Look, not everybody can be the fastest FPV drone pilot on the planet or the coolest or the most watched. Like, I'm not saying that. I just mean in terms of like your everyday, like what you're gonna do, and like you said, like what are you gonna do for the rest of your life? Like, I will tell you, like I am not sure. I on a daily basis rethink and think and question what the future of this is going to look like. Now that being said, to this day, every time, and I've said this to so many people, every time that I'm like, here's the breaking point, like, here's the point where things are going to go down. There's too much competition. There's too much of this. And I get reminded, and it's always by sales or sales or slash, deals or opportunities with other companies that, present themselves in those moments that just keep doing what you're doing. And if you're doing it and doing it right, it's the same like at restaurants, right? If it's good food, people are going to come eat it. Now,
Yeah,
it can be good food and really bad service, and you'll see the decline, and you'll be like, why? Like, why am I getting bad review? Why am I 3 stars or 2 stars, not 5 stars? But everybody loves our food, right? There's a reason, right? And if you relate that and can understand that you can still be really great, and like as long as you understand that like the totality of it is only as much as you put in, then like that's where for me, like i I don't like building drones every day and like having like today to like could bang my head against the wall trying to tune drones to a point that I feel comfortable sending them, which funny enough I'm probably more critical than the guy that's getting it or the girl or whoever. That
of course.
drives me to a frustration, but I'd rather that be my frustration than Friday night at 10:30 staring at a line out the door when we close at 11 and knowing that like to do it right I gotta like treat these guys like it's 7 o'clock at night, and we're gonna be here till 1 in the morning, and it's gonna whatever. Like that's hard to do because we're selfish people as humans, right? And like there becomes that point of like you just anyways. So
Yeah,
I
but it's all
have a
relative, right? I
favorite
mean,
to bed, but I mean, if I'm gonna like buy something just for me, like just to go, like it, like you said, like I just want to go fly, and I just want something to do that with. I just buy a 5 inch. Like I mean, for me, I love our Ichabod builds, the same as the Hydrophobe build. It's just a 5 inch that gets the GoPro out in front, so where there's no props in view, no matter what angle. For me, it just that a 5 inch in general, just an open prop 5 inch to go rip around is where my sweet spot is. That being said, like, I mean, for instance, like the 3 inch, this is actually kind of something that, like, if I actually really wanted to, like, go bang around and, like, not worry about hitting the ground and getting back up, I might do something like this because 3 inches have really kind of come around these days. Which that's our QSL wind. But yeah, I mean, I think those are the most fun in terms of, like, going to fly and just, like, having fun with. And then yeah, I mean build wise, I mean building big is never fun. It's
yeah,
a task, but a good 8S like 9 inch build to me, like for Sena lifters, that's probably like my sweet spot for like if I was just recommending to people, and most people that I see and with the work that I know that gets done, a 9 inch 6 or 9 inch 8S, like dude, it's going to pretty much do everything you need, and it feels like a heavy 7 inch when you don't know what you're flying. And so,
yeah.
yeah,
Well,
yeah,
I mean, it's gotta be cool though, too, though, to know like what they're gonna be used for, like you
yeah.
said. Like
Oh,
you've built some pretty sweet drones that have worked on some pretty awesome big projects that have like done some really cool stuff. So it's like
yeah,
it's cool to know that, right? There's like
absolutely, absolutely. And it's cool. What's even cooler is, and funny enough, my wife and son are no longer amused by this, and they haven't been for about 4 years now. But like, what was cool was it was like probably 2021, like early, you started seeing this like influx where on a daily basis you would see something, if not multiple things, that were like you could point to and go, that's FPV. And not only is that FPV, I know who's doing that. And half the time back then, yeah, it was like, hey, we built that, I built that, I see it really, and not to take away from anybody that has helped be a part of QSL from time to time. I've had a handful of folks come and go in terms of assembly work and even some final kind of soldering work for the most part. But everything that goes out this door goes to my desk, and honestly, I solder something to it usually, if not half of it, if it's a bigger build. And I'm the one that does the setup, I'm the one that does the tuning, and I'm the one that sends it out the door. And that's because you're buying, like, I've established this brand and what we deliver, which is access to professional tools delivered ready to shoot in a way that makes the person using it more comfortable and confident, because that is the biggest thing in FPV, is being confident in yourself, your gear, and your skills, and obviously your camera, I guess, if you're shooting camera work. And so taking that one off the plate is where what I started QSL wanted to be, was that access point. And so the biggest part of when I said, why do you I don't like to build anymore, is I have built and done every single drone that we've sold, which is, I couldn't tell you an exact number, but I can tell you we're definitely over 1,000 builds. I'd say we're probably closer to 2,000 than 1,000. And yeah, like I
A lot.
I can't think of anything crazy off the top of my head that's happened with one of our builds that was a fault of us doing something
Yeah.
build wise, right? And so like it's a huge thing to be proud of. And then now today, where again I said, 2021, you saw this. Hey, look at the car commercial. Hey, look at the snowboarder event. Like those were small things, but now it's like every day, all day. Like the traditional pullback or droney top shot is like no longer what you see all the time. Now what you see is the FPV shot, and more so what you see, the style of the shots, even terrestrial or whatever you call them. I'm not a movie guy. I don't shoot for a living. They are literally shooting things in a more immersive feel, and it's because of FPV. And it's not because they want to implement FPV and they want it to always mimic it. I think at the core, it's because it's a type of feel now, of that immersive, more raw, natural thing. So you see so many more camera shakes and so many more it's like even animations. You see it like, oh,
I think it's just more real, right?
what's the guy on Discovery? Josh, whatever. He's like the adventure guy. He goes on adventures and stuff. Like even him, like dude, it's been 4 years, I think. But if you look at his opening intro, it's essentially a CGI created like FPV shot. And I'm not talking about AI. I just mean at some point somebody like decided they were going to make that intro look like it was a drone flying through the gate the way that they have it and through the jungle. But it's like clearly a 3D animation. You know what I mean? So anyways, I find that more interesting, is that FPV is influencing the way filmmakers and creators are actually shooting their work when they're not using drones. So
yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot of different ways, right? The movie industry, the real estate industry, even the construction and others. It's just a cool way to show off, your space or your building or your shot. Or now you see them too, is like the handhelds, right? It's like putting a handle on the top of an FPV and doing a grab right in the middle of the shot, and then passing it through the shot. And there's so many different ways that you've been able to get creative now with it. But you brought up a good point before. Is like, hey, people come to you to just be ready to fly. Like they trust it. They know. Nick actually mentioned that on last week's episode of like for the Live Golf, right? You built them a one for live broadcast with the 203 units, right? I think it was, and or multiple antennas, just to like 100% know that like, hey, we're good to go. Trust it. You can't have anything go wrong when you're in certain situations here, and a lot of people just either don't have the time or the know-how or the skills to really take care of it like you would, right? Like
Right.
you're out there and you're tuning it, everything like you mentioned before, to make sure that it is 100% gonna work the way it should, and they're just gonna be confident that they just need to go fly and do what they need to do.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
No, I mean, I
Great.
hear it all the time. I mean, again, I'm not here to brag or like toss names and stuff out, but I do. I hear it all the time. I mean, I got it. I got recently, we just shipped out, in fact, one of these wins to a client at Up Close Drones. And he typically builds and does his own stuff. He got our build and, he emailed me and was like, hey, dude, this is awesome. Like, it's great. Now, he contacted me because he actually wanted us to build like a fully waterproof, like something that he could trust, that he could be confident in, right? And so we typically don't really do that because there's a lot of factors that go into the final waterproofing stage, and like from us to them, like binding and all kinds of stuff. But we did the best we could in terms of getting it as ready to be final waterproofed as possible. So everything was coated. We sealed stuff up. At any rate, he asked like, "Hey, can I send you these other builds that I have so you can like clean them up, test them, tune them, get them ready to go, and I can trust in them essentially." Unfortunately, I don't do a lot of that because, like I said, I'm only me, and going back over other people's builds. I mean, just going back over my builds and testing and holding a fine-tuned comb to it, or fine-tooth comb to it, so to speak, is tough. Doing it for someone else, I mean, I'd have to charge more than the drone is worth essentially to do the work.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, just hearing that, his confidence in our build is so high that he now is like, hey, everything we do going forward. And the reality of it is that if you are doing your job as the drone pilot in whatever way you're using these tools, if you're building your business the right way, you're only going to get busier and busier. And so it only seems normal to then look for a way to outsource something, right? Like that's the smartest thing to do is like, what's the first
Yeah.
thing to go? And as much as the FPV, hardcore community will say, you got to know how to build and test and tune and do your own things. No, you don't. No, you don't. If your job is to just fly a camera and you can buy something that flies the camera that you're confident in and is proven that works, what does it matter? A second one. Or buy it from someone who, when you do break it, is going to help you either fix it or troubleshoot it or figure it out, right? And that's where, again, back full circle to like why I created QSL, and at the heart of it is, is me and our support system and our ability, my our ability to stay with the client in terms of making sure that if they do need something that we can. So like we offer refresh. Now, refresh is not DJI, like send it to us, you get a brand new drone. Refresh is if you need it upgraded or fixed and you don't want to do it, send it to us, pay us for shipping to ship it back and to us. So either way, we'll look at it, we'll fix it, we'll charge you for the parts, but I'm not going to charge you labor. Now, we do that where, some of our Cinelifters, most of our Cinelifters all come with refresh. In fact, they all do, because the price point's up there to where I don't have to bill for it. For our smaller stuff, it's like $50 to $75 kind of up front. And, all you're really doing is, again, kind of paying for that labor down the road. But I mean, a perfect example is, okay, you fly something, you break it, you need it next weekend for another gig. Well, get a hold of me. Troy, I'm sending it to you overnight. Can you do this? Now, for a rushed priority service like that, I might have to charge something possibly, but
Right.
typically if it's something and I have the parts and we can make it work, like we'll make it work and we'll get it kind of rushed back out the door for you. So, our goal isn't to have all of the people in the world buying from us, because if they were, I'd never be able to help them all in those ways. But we want like people that buy into what we do and understand and trust that what we do, and have flown what we do, that yeah, we'll be there for you guys. And so some of our people like Nick, like we do that for Nick pretty much, no matter what. He just sent us a couple of his builds and was like, hey, I'm having some small things that are happening possibly, can you help me figure it out? Also, can you change one or two things for me while it's there? And while
Hmm.
I was here, we made it better. We added an extra, antenna holder and an antenna, so we had better reception. We figured out what was going on and why he was having issues with his receiver and fixed that and tested it. And sent him back out, and he used them that weekend that he needed them, and he appreciated it. So
Yep.
continue to work with folks like that, as people that respect us and appreciate it. So Yeah.
No, that's the way to do it, man. It's all about relationships, right? And
Yep. And
building
opportunity.
relationships.
And again, like you can't just stay hyper focused on like one goal. You got to be agile. And that's the one thing I've learned. And I think, again, like all of these stories that you'll hear from other people and their success, there's a point where I never wanted to work for myself, or at least I didn't think I did. And I never understood what my ability, what other people's worth in me could be if I just put it out there in a certain way. And in the beginning, I was more worried about chasing the YouTube stuff, And I'm not saying that if you want to be a top YouTube creator, you can't set that out, but there's a path to that, and
Yeah.
it's a long one, and it's very strict in stuff. And I'm not that strict. I can't be every day doing that, and that's why I never succeeded very well. But I did have enough understanding of what was working that I was getting followings. So again, at the end of the day, it came down to touching on the right buttons at the right time when I have the time, and when there is downtime, finding that outlet that is going to provide another opportunity rather than sitting and waiting for another opportunity. And I think that's the biggest thing, is like my entire story about how I get here is just continually to push on a button whenever that was there, and
Yep.
or find a button to push.
For sure. Yeah,
So
I love it. You always got to be able to see those opportunities, take advantage for them, nurture them, make sure that they're around when they are presented, but then also when you want to actually act on them too. So,
yeah,
well, Troy, I appreciate you sharing your story today again with us and me, and yeah, putting it out there. I know you put it out there a lot before in different ways too, but I just, I'm glad to connect and
yeah.
um, have you on. So I appreciate. Where can people reach out to you or find you?
Yeah, quadstandardlabs.com. It's all together, quadstandardlabs.com, at QS Labs on Instagram. But the website's really the best. I mean, everything's there for you. Again, I mean, funny enough, another good story is not story, but a good leaving it on this tidbit. My website's a great example. I don't update it every day. There's plenty of stuff I could do better, but at the end of the day, people find it, and there's action on there to take, which is free discovery calls. If you have something you want to chat about and figure something out, you can book one right there. It uses an app called Calendly. I use that same link in Facebook groups, not maybe on a daily, but at least a couple of times a week, where I just go, hey, book a call if you want to chat about it. And it's a good example of just stoking the fire, like keeping it going, right? Like sticking to those tools, and whether you use them every day or not, just have a bunch of tools in your tool bag, so when you do need them, right? So yeah, quadstandardlabs.com. Feel free to reach out. Facebook, you'll figure it out. It's not hard to
Love it.
find us.
Yeah, we'll put all the links in the show notes as
Yeah,
well.
and
But
man, thank you
um,
for having me. I mean, look, I just want to say, I think it's great for folks like, creating content to have more of these, focused kind of conversations about people, and discussion about these types of things. And I just, I definitely have more conversations, and I look forward to, checking out your channel a little more, and kind of figuring out, more about you, man, because I didn't get a chance
yeah,
to ask you anything about you. I feel like
no, this
I
podcast
turned the
wasn't about
tables
me.
on you a little bit.
You can find some stuff, but
Yeah.
not a lot. This podcast ain't about me, but I appreciate it. We'll stay connected again for sure. But yeah, Troy, a pleasure for having you, and we'll talk to you soon.
Awesome, man. Thank you.
Fine, everybody.